Ilaria Capua, scientist, and tonight we have Cecilia Alemani. Cecilia Alemani is the director and chief curator of Highland Art, the public art program presented by the non-profit organization Friends of the High Line here in New York. Since 2012, she has commissioned and curated public art projects on the High Line by over 200 artists. She was also the curator of the Italian Pavilion at the 2017 Venice Biennale last year. For the Italian Pavilion, she organized the exhibition Il Mondo Magico, featuring new commissions by Giorgio Andreotta Calò, who was also a winner of the New York Prize of the Institute, Roberto Cuoghi, and Adelita Usnibei. Throughout their career, Alemani has collaborated with many museums, institutions, and foundations, and as independent curator, she has organized numerous exhibitions. Alemani worked as guest curator for the performance art Performa 11. She is the co-founder of No Soul for Sale, a festival of independent spaces, non-profit organization, and artist collectives. And from January 2009 to February 2010, she served as curatorial director of X Initiative New York, a year-long experimental non-profit space in Chelsea. In conversation with Cecilia Alemani, as usual, we have Maria Teresa Cometto. Please enjoy.
So thank you everybody for coming this evening. Thank you, Cecilia, for accepting to come and have this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, the High Line is one of the most visited landmarks in New York. I think it is visited by something like 8 million people per year.
Yeah,
right?
last year was 7.5, but the year before was 8, so.
Okay, great. And it is one of my favorite landmarks also. And it's particularly enjoyable also thanks to the art that you can admire while strolling on the High Line. So can you tell us, Cecilia, what's special about art in open space like the High Line?
So just to give you a little background, if you're not familiar with the art program, we, when you walk the Highland, very often you encounter sculptures and installations, murals, billboards, and that's they're all part of the Highland Art Program, which I curate. And I think, you know, what makes it different from other public art organizations, or maybe what you think of public art as a more traditional sculpture in the public sphere, is the deep relationship with the surroundings. And by surroundings, I mean the striking vegetation that the High Line is very well known for, which was designed by this amazing horticulturalist called Pete Udoff, the design and the architecture itself of the High Line, and its people. So those three sort of elements make art on the High Line quite special, and also something that needs to be created and conceived for the space. And very often in contemporary art, we say something is site-specific, which means it's something that has been conceived for that space. And I know it's a bit of an abused term, but it really applies very well on the High Line, because when the High Line was designed back in 2005, there was no idea of doing art. There was no plan of doing art in the park. So when you walk the High Line, there isn't really a section or like a plaza or a place that is devoted to art where you could do art in an easy way. So in a way, it's a challenge, because art has to occupy what we call the planting beds, or the path. But it's a compromise that actually generates something that for artists is usually a great challenge, to come up with something that can dialogue with the vegetation on one side and the architecture.
Yeah. So what are the advantages of working in an open space compared to a traditional museum or an indoor space?
I mean, I'd like to flip the question and say what the challenges are. But the advantages are that, it's, of course, it's not a traditional museum space. We don't have walls. We don't have a ceiling, unfortunately. And it's also an unusual park because unlike when you think of a sculpture park, like Storm King, for instance, we don't even have like a lawn with grass or trees. The Highland is a path. It's an urban park, so it's a challenging park as well. But I think for artists is, the advantage is to be able to exhibit your work to 8 million people, and these 8 million people are not necessarily art lovers. Of course, there might be some art lovers out of this giant crowd, but it's really being able to talk and to offer your work to a very, very wide audience, which is, I think, what makes the program quite unique.
Yeah, among the difficulties, there is snow right now.
Yeah.
It's full of snow, and so you are going to install new projects, and snow will be.
Yeah, it's the snow now, and then it's the hurricane, and then it's the sun. So it's. I always joke that it's. When I started working for the Highline, I work closely with a production manager who is the person that works with the artists to make sure that whatever we show doesn't fall and doesn't crumble and doesn't kill anyone. But also we have all this rule that we have to have architects and engineers signing off our projects, and they have to be able to sustain hurricane winds. And I was like, come on, it's New York City, we're never gonna get a hurricane. And that was 2012 when we got what was the name of that? Like Sandy. And we were installing this massive piece by an African artist called Ella Natsui, like the biggest piece we've ever done, and it was just made of very delicate metal, and it was just a nightmare, but we survived. Actually, because we got all this approval before, we were installing it in the proper way, but also West Chelsea was with no power for like 2 weeks, so we got kind of stuck in between, but we survived. So, it's a good challenge that artists never have in a museum. Of course, when you show in a museum like MoMA, you might have the same challenge that people tend to touch. For us, it's beyond that. It's like climbing and just, and then it's the weather. So it's the people impact and then the weather that in New York City is really extreme on both sides, snow and sun.
Yeah. As the director mentioned earlier, you have curated about 200 projects all over these years. How do you choose the artists and the projects?
So, maybe also the difference between running a space like the Highland and a museum is that we have a broader mission, and, I also were able to shape that mission myself for the art program. So we work with a very wide variety of artists, emerging, mid-career, very well-known artists, but also overlooked and forgotten artists. Usually we do, we pay attention to the local art scene, but being in New York, local art scene, also in Chelsea, we might talk for a long time on what it means, like the local art scene. So the program is actually very international. So we show about 50% of international artists because also our audience is extremely international. And so one of the main aspects of our program is that we try to work with artists that also have never done public art before. And the idea is to share not only a budget to produce and commission a new artwork, but also to share our expertise, because now we do know how to make things sustain the hurricane winds. So we can actually help artists that have never had those challenges. And it's, if it's your first time in a public art world, the Highland is extreme because it's you have everything in concentrated in a very small space. So it's a challenge, but I think it's something that we can offer the artists that they can't get anywhere else.
So the projects are all created for the Highline.
I would say
They are original.
95% are new, and that's, I would love to get to 100%. It's just a question of budget. Usually we commission and produce new works. They span from smaller works to monumental works, but they can also be performances. We have murals and billboards. So in a way, we try to depart from the more traditional notion of public art as being a bronze sculpture on a plinth, and to expand that notion to include like time-based works, live works, like performances and videos, so that what you encounter on the Highland is not necessarily the most traditional one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going back for a moment to the very beginning of your career, you come from Milan, right? So what attracted you to the art world initially? Were you inspired by any member of your family? I read somewhere that you have an uncle who was a famous architect and designer in Italy, Lodovico Barbiano di Belgioioso, who built, among other things, the Torre Velasca in Milan, which is quite a quite a thing.
I think my family's like my grandfather was a teacher of like an art history teacher, and I think my family was always passionate about art, certainly not contemporary art, but it's something that I kind of lived in. And then I come from a more academic background. I studied philosophy in Italy, and then when I was doing my studies, I took, my major was in aesthetics, so in philosophy of art, and at that point I tried to get closer to contemporary art, coming again more from a theoretical perspective. And then when you graduate from philosophy, I don't know if it's the same here in the States, but in Italy, usually they say that philosophy opens any door you want to go, any job you want, which is not exactly true. Actually, the only true fact was that people, when I was doing all kind of interview, the only thing that they asked me if I spoke English, and I didn't, because it was very common in northern Italy when I grew up to study French. So I studied French. So I graduated with my beautiful diploma in philosophy, and then I had to go back and study English. But that was actually also an opportunity to move, and I was lucky that I was able to move to London to study English, but at the same time I got close to certain institutions like Tate Modern, because I was kind of tired of doing English classes, and I went to just listen to conversations and talks at the museum, and I kind of understood that there was actually a job out of what I studied that could be like a concrete job of the curator and working with artists to install exhibition. And at that point, I went back to Italy and I worked for a year for a commercial gallery. And then I moved to New York to do a master in contemporary art.
Yeah. Do you think that being Italian gave you an advantage in the art world? Or not?
I think, sure, yes.
You can say.
No, it gives you the advantage that I think it's an assumption, but no matter where you were born, you kind of grew up surrounded by art, no matter what kind of time or era. I think it's also like a very spoiled position, because you assume that everything around you, you're like in a privileged position, and then when you move to a country where you're not surrounded by all these amazing, monuments and examples of art, it's harder to let it go. But I think it helped me, also have the humility to understand that we are in a privileged situation in Italy in terms of culture, and it's great to bring that kind of learning to other places and to share it with other communities.
Yeah, and on the other hand, do you think that Italian institutions can learn something from your experience here in the United States? Are there best practices that could be imported to Italy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, yes. I don't work for, like, the Highland is a hybrid institution. It's not a museum, and it's a very young organization. So everything is very efficient. So sure, we can we can bring a lot of that to Italy. I think it's the American mentality is much more pragmatic, and I love it. That's the way I like to work, and I'm sure anyone could bring that to Italy. But again, talking about conditions, it's just a different environment, so it's harder to move things and to change things in Italy. That doesn't mean that it won't happen, but I think it's a way of it's moving forward and not backward. It's looking forward and not backwards.
Sure. Well, do you think that in Italy there could be a High Line, and where?
I think there was some, like in Rome. I remember I read a few years ago that there was an attempt of doing the High Line. It's sure, why not? I think. One of the most interesting evolutions of our institutions, Friends of the Highland, is that we just launched something that is called the Highland Network. And it's basically just a network of projects that are similar or inspired by the Highline that are happening everywhere in the States, from Philadelphia, Chicago, to Houston and Austin and Los Angeles. But also the idea is to expand it also internationally. And it's basically just a way of sharing expertise and best practice and sort of, the Highland is a great example, but also we got there making also lots of mistakes. And so we just want to share our experience. So, and they're all different kinds of kind of industrial reuse projects, but I'm sure there might be something in Italy as well. But I also feel like the Highland is successful in New York. It's less about the actual physical structure, and it's because it's in New York. And New York is a city that embraces the new and novelty with so much enthusiasm that I don't know if you could say the same, in Rome.
Right. Talking about the new installations on the High Line for this year, there is already a large-scale mural called I Lift My Lamp Beside the Golden Door, which is the final line of the poem that is engraved inside the Statue of Liberty. This installation was created by Dorothy Iannone, a Berlin-based artist whose works, I read on the Highline website, focus on eroticism and the female sexual experience. Why her work?
So Dorothy is a fantastic artist. She's American, but she lives in Berlin since the 1960s. She's 84, I believe, and she's one
maybe
of...
Italian-American, Iannone?
Yeah, maybe. For sure she was born in America, but probably yes. And she's someone that has been working since the late 1950s and 60s, but perhaps because she was a woman, had a hard time, having a career recognized. And just recently, I would say maybe 10 years ago, she started being recognized again. And she's a fantastic painter and sculptor. And, if you Google her paintings are quite sexy, and there is lots of nudity in a very positive and, exciting way. And so we invited her actually a while ago for another project, which couldn't work out. And so finally we thought of using the same artwork that she made for us for like a few years ago for one of these amazing murals that we have along the Highland. It's a building next to the Highland at 22nd Street, which is just blank. And so we asked the owner of the building to paint it. And so Dorothy was very excited to reconfigure this piece. And the piece consists of three ladies' liberty, three statues of liberties that are kind of sexy and very colorful. And there is, again, the poem that is actually inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty, but they are actually crying. And so they have a little tear on their face. And of course, when we commissioned the piece originally 3 years ago, it was very much about bringing a very feminine icon and symbol to the Highline. Now the piece gets yet another meaning, of course, thinking about what's happening in terms of immigration and the current revisions of immigration laws, and so she was very interested in, recontextualizing this symbol in today's America.
Yeah. Talking about women and art, the Brooklyn-based arts online magazine Hyperallergic, I don't know if you know it, has ranked female artist number 5 on its list of the most powerless people in the art world. Do you agree with this ranking?
Well, what were the other 4? Do you know? Probably, but look, it's a complicated conversation, and it's hard to say I agree because I don't know who the other. I remember reading the article, but I don't remember who the other ones were. And it's still a big issue, and I wasn't here in the 60s, but I feel it's still the same issues that we need to address in terms of equality and equity, and from how many women are actually holding positions of power in cultural institutions in New York City, to how many women gets actually featured in museums. It's hard, but I think now, for better or worse, what's happening in our society might help, getting to a better point in terms of equality.
Yeah, and talking about equality and power, is the Me Too movement affecting also the art world?
Yeah, and I think it's, I'm sure everybody has read many articles about scandals, and I think, I'm less interested in that, and I'm more interested in what's coming out of the scandals, and I hope it is an awakening and a way of, taking people accountable for what we have done, and changing the way we think of making exhibitions, and treat our colleagues, and especially of course of female colleagues. And it's a sad period, but also an exciting one, and I think the art world is really embracing this movement to make concrete changes. So it's early to say, but I think it's I just want to have this conversation again in a year, and hopefully we'll have some positive outcome.
Great. Talking again about your career, but not only that, you have worked with Francesco Bonami, who is another famous Italian art curator. And Bonami wrote an interesting book titled Lo potevo fare anch'io, I could have done it myself. That is what a lot of people say in front of some contemporary art. Potevo farlo anch'io. Can you, Cecilia, explain to us, who are not art experts, why we couldn't have done it?
No, I cannot. It's actually it's an ironic question, but it's true. I can. I mean, it's not true that maybe you could have done it, actually, or I could have done it. I think Francesco is a friend, but also someone that can read contemporary and popular culture quite well, and with a very ironic eye. And I think he makes fun not just of the people that say I could have done it myself, but also on the other side of the artist, because I'm pretty sure that he believes that we could have done some of the great artworks out there. We could have done it ourselves. I guess the bottom line is, but we didn't. So somebody else did. Then somebody else had the idea before and realized it and put it out in the world. So I think that would be probably a simple way of reading of interpreting that book.
I think that his goal was, among other things, to show that contemporary art is real art too. And so why would you describe the Gold Toilet by Catalan real art?
Because it was made by Catalan, and because the curator of the museum, I don't know if you know, had this brilliant idea of, just stepping back, the White House asked the Guggenheim to request, I think it was a Van Gogh on loan for no, I don't know if it was a Van Gogh. Anyway, Van Gogh on loan to bring to the White House, and the Guggenheim politely responded that they couldn't actually loan that piece, but instead they could have loaned Maurizio Cattelan's Golden Toilet. And I think she got quite in trouble for that, but I think it was actually, I think it's an amazing artwork, and the White House should have accepted it, because I used it. I can tell you, it's an amazing, not just an amazing artwork, but it's an amazing feeling. So,
anybody here used it? Okay, a few people. Yeah. Do you know where it is now?
I don't know actually, because I actually thought it was gonna stay there for longer, and they took it down just a couple of months ago, or like recently. I'm not sure. I don't know if it belongs to the museum, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But I know it was solid gold, so it's probably in a safe.
Yeah, vault. Talking about Maurizio Cattelan, is it true that he's the reason why you met your husband, who doesn't know it, is Massimiliano Gioni, the artistic director of the new museum here in New York?
It's actually not true. I'm sorry to tell you. I don't know why people say that. It's not true.
Okay.
I didn't know Maurizio before I met Massimiliano, so
I read
it's probably
somewhere.
one of these Maurizio's legends, half truth. But
Okay, but you are friends.
yeah, we're friends.
Okay. Well, talking about your husband, Massimiliano Gioni, you are often described as the, quote, half of one of the most influential art world power couples, unquote. How do you feel about it? And
I wish that was true, but
well,
it's no. I mean, we're lucky that we do the same profession, so it's nice to be able to go and see shows together, to travel together for the same kind of goal. We both love art and artists quite deeply, so it's great to share it with your family. It makes your life also easier, because I cannot imagine being married to someone that doesn't care about art. I mean, maybe that's actually could be amazing, but logistically it could be a nightmare. But there's no, curators have no power, nor do artists, but curators, it's really like the bottom line, I think.
how does it work? Do you collaborate on some projects? Do you criticize each other?
We don't collaborate usually. That wouldn't go well. We test ideas and proposals with each other. We're very tough with each other. We're also very different. We do two very different jobs, and he has a more traditional job because he works in a museum, and so he can mount exhibitions and do catalogs in a way that I don't, and I have different challenges. But I think it's a nice dialogue, but also we try not to do that too much. Sometimes it's also nice to stare at a white wall, because I know that's your next question.
Yeah. Is it true that in your home there are no paintings, piece of art, and the walls are white? And why?
Because we look at art all day long, and when I go home, I just want to stare at the white wall. It's like people meditate or they do yoga, I stare at the white wall. It's actually really, great.
Relaxing.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, now actually a couple of art, we do have a couple of artworks, but just because we don't have space otherwise to put them, so.
Mm-hmm. And home, you have a home also in Milan, right? Do you feel more at home in Milan or here in New York?
I think, it's in New York, we live in this village on a 4-story walk up, and I feel like with IKEA furniture, which is great, but we still live like students, like I feel like an NYU student because I'm surrounded by NYU students, and that feels great because I feel young, although I'm not, but I think I always feel it's more like a temporary situation here, although, I've been here for 15 years and I probably won't leave. So in Milan, we're lucky because we have a small apartment that is, with brick walls and not sheetrock. So just that makes me feel like it's more like a home. And also it's the place where I grew up, so.
Sure. Your new projects. I've heard that you are preparing something in Buenos Aires. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, so besides the Highland, which is my full-time job, sometimes I have smaller side projects, and this year I'm very excited because I'm doing a project in South America, in Buenos Aires. It's an initiative by Art Basel, the fair that you probably know that has a venue in Switzerland and one in Miami, one in Hong Kong. But this is a completely new project. It's actually not an art fair. It's not a marketplace. But the idea is to create and to go to a number of cities, let's say 3 or 4 in the world, that are not part of the art map, and work with their governments and their local, administration to create cultural experiences that might foster, the birth of a great art scene and bring international people there, and then hopefully also generate an economic impact. And that, just to tell you a bit about the origin of the project, many cities around the world approach Art Basel every day with the invitation to bring the fair to their cities because they see the cultural and economic impact that a fair like Art Basel has. If you think of Miami 20 years ago, and if you think of Miami now, you could probably estimate how the economic impact that Art Basel Miami Beach brought to the city. And museums have opened, ICAs, private collections. So it's a great kind of effect that goes beyond just the cultural world. But Art Basel cannot open more fairs. They have 3 fairs in 3 different continents. That's enough. And then what they realize is that these cities actually, they're not asking for the fair itself, for the marketplace, but they're asking for the surroundings, for the effervescence that in that specific week of the year gets generated by the fair. But maybe you could achieve that same cultural programming and cultural offering without the fair, because nobody wants another fair, let's be honest. And so this is an experiment. Buenos Aires is the first city that is part of this Art Basel Cities initiative, and I'm the artistic director. And what it is basically a week in September in which I will be curating a number of public art projects throughout the city. And in addition of that, there will be all the institutions that are already in Buenos Aires, which are fantastic. There are great museums, wonderful private foundations, fantastic art scene. The only problem that they have is that it's far, and it's just not on the art map because they don't have a big biennale, they don't have events for which somebody would take a 12-hour flight to go, but the scene there is great. And so the idea is to activate the city in a way that could be helpful not just for the international people like myself and other curators going and getting to know the art scene there, but also for the local scene. And the idea is that it's a long-term commitment, so it might be from 2 or 3 years, and the idea is that after that there will be not just a legacy of public artworks in the city, but perhaps someone else will pick up the work and continue and create a series of networks between curators and artists and art professionals.
Yeah. Cecilia, you are also a mother of a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
3, 4
2.5.
Oh, okay. Son. How do you expose him to art? And which is your advice to parents willing to make their children love art?
I don't know if he loves art, but he gets carried to everything that we do, usually on his papa's shoulders because he doesn't like the stroller anymore. He comes with us to everything that we do. Unfortunately, we both have very demanding jobs during the week, so we have to go see art in the weekends, and we go to museums, we go to galleries, and of course he comes with us because also the unfortunate part of being an immigrant here is that we don't have family here, so we don't have the traditional Italian grandparents that take care of your son. And so he has to come. And so far, the first couple of years is fine. Now he starts getting a bit more
Impatient.
Yeah, impatient, and he recognizes the museum, and so he just like, meh. But then there's, at the Guggenheim, then he can throw the coins in the fountain. So that some things he loves, and then, American museums are actually amazing because they always offer great educational kits.
For
And,
children. Yeah, I think that one of the things that Italian museums can learn from the American ones is having spaces and activities for children. Here, everywhere, there is a space for special exhibitions and stuff for children or activities anyway.
Yeah,
while in Italy is less frequent, I think.
Yeah, I don't know, because honestly I never paid attention before becoming a mother, and also it's something that I also noticed on the Highland. We do amazing family programming on the Highland, and it's hard for us to get the word out. But we offer amazing services for families, for visitors that come, and museums do the same, and it's just an incredible resource because it makes the experience for these young people not like a forced experience, but something they can also have fun with.
Yeah. And what is your advice for people willing to start collecting art? Do we have to be rich to be collectors
I don't think so. You can. I think my basic advice is to go and see as much as you can. New York City is an amazing city. You can see museums and galleries, and all the galleries. They might feel like intimidating because to go to Chelsea and open that heavy door might be intimidating, but they are all also free and open, and usually there is, not usually, but some exceptions, some very good art to see. And I think you need to kind of train your eye and see a lot and read a lot. But in terms of collecting, I think, the Fair Week was just a couple of weeks ago. And of course, if you go to the Armory show, you might not be able to buy anything because probably the lower price is $5,000. But I think if you go to younger fairs, like there is this great fair called Spring Breaks, which happens in the old Condé Nast building in Times Square, and it's an amazing experience because it's not a fair done by galleries, but it's a fair done by curators and other artists. So you walk through this booth, which were the old Vogue office booths, and then it's like, I don't know, 300 kind of curated shows, and they span, you see everything there.
When does it happen?
It just happened. Actually, it happened the first week of March, but I think there might still be something on view. You should check it out. It's called Spring Breaks. And I'm sure the price point is very low, and I always joke that the energy is great, and if you clean it up a bit and you put on a white wall, it's the same as the Armory, so it might just be, good bargain.
Okay. Well, I would stop here and open the floor. Thank you, Cecilia. And so open the floor to questions from the audience. I know that there are several artists here also, so I'm sure we will have an interesting conversation.
How did it come about that you came to New York to work? I came here because I went to grad school. So after I kind of knew I wanted to become a curator, I took the easiest way, which was, there are curatorial schools. And when I did it, it wasn't so popular. There were maybe 5 or 6 in the world, and there was one very good one here in New York at Bard College. And so I applied and I got in, and then I decided to stay.
The director?
Comparing to your work here in New York, how was the experience to be the curator of the Italian Pavilion at Biennale?
Okay.
Tough question.
No, you focus on results, and I think, I was really, really happy with the result. I just sigh because the Italian Pavilion has quite troubled history, and it's been moved many times in terms of actual physical venues within the institution of the Venice Biennale. Now it's hosted in the biggest space. It's the biggest national pavilion, It's about 20,000 square feet. So it's a daunting space to fill, and I wanted to do a good job because in the past it's been kind of trouble. And, it was great on one side because I had the freedom of doing what I wanted. It was really hard on the financial side because I had basically a very limited budget and I had to raise a lot of money, which in America it's much easier to do. In Italy we don't have the same fiscal advantages that we have here in terms of donations, so it was really hard. But I think overall it was a great experience, and I feel very fortunate because I was able to work for such a prestigious institution. And, the Italian pavilion is commissioned by the Minister of Culture and then is produced by the Venice Biennale. So I had to deal with these two kind of giant elephants, but also they didn't really care so much about me. So I kind of had carte blanche to do what I wanted. Ciao.
Since you, as mentioned, you worked on the Italian pavilion at the Biennale last year, which, by the way, I had the chance to see, and congratulations because it was really great. It was a very strong curatorial statement and great artists there.
Thank you.
And also, you work with few Italian artists at the Highland, and also together we had a chance to work with a pavilion you are commissioned twice in this year. So it's a really broad question, but what's your view on Italian contemporary art today, and especially as relative to the New York scene?
I think the Italian scene is as great as the New York scene. It's probably better because it's less polluted with a lot of stuff. I think there are some amazing Italian artists of a young generation, in their early 30s. I think what's hard for them once they decide to stay in Italy is that once you're out of school, it's not like New York that you have a lot of opportunities that can be, of course, I'm not talking about the Museum of Modern Art, but you have non-profit spaces, alternative spaces that can give you a chance to experiment with something new. In Italy, I feel like there is a big division between when you're out of school and then what is the next step. There isn't really a tradition of alternative experimental spaces, and you have and also contemporary art museums. There are not that many. So I think it's harder to do that kind of jump, and that's probably why a lot of Italian artists move out of Italy in those formative years, when you're in your 30s and early 40s, because in other countries I think there are more platforms for you to take risks and to experiment, while in Italy I feel like it's a bit harder to do that. But then, I think it's also, we as Italian, we like to cry and complain a lot. But I think there are, great institutions and fairs. And the Venice Biennale is in Italy. So we have one of the most prestigious institutions in the world in Italy. So we should also be happy for what we have.
Cool.
Hello.
Now, the High Line in Chelsea is becoming surrounded by real estate development and luxury housing. How has this impacted your curating and finding art and installing art?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the reason I like to work for the Highline, unlike a museum where you work for 9 years to do one show, and at that point the show is kind of outdated, is that you need to be very agile and responsive, and also physically responsive, because sometimes you look at a property where you would like to do a mural, and the year after that building has been knocked down. So you kind of you can't plan 5 years ahead. That's what I'm saying. I think it's a challenge for us in general as a park, because from very basic things, it changes the shades and the shadows on the park, so the vegetation changes, so we have to replant and change our plants. It changes the wind courses, sometimes a space where we would do lots of performances and programming because it was a cover passage. Now becomes impossible to use because there's these wind channels that hit you like no matter what day of the year it is. But at the same time, you know, there are always also new opportunities to collaborate and to, you know, to curate also on, you know, on their properties. So I think as long as you remain flexible and with the understanding that we live in New York City and it's a city that changes every day and there is, you know, that's its DNA. And so you like it or not, you know, you adapt and you move on and you try to find opportunities for artists there as well.
Over there, there was a question.
Yes. What are the factors? I know you said before climate is a big one, but what are other factors that impact your choices in the artworks or artists?
I think, you know, the weather is more like something that we tell the artists to be careful with. I think for me, again, I like to work with artists that can understand and peel off the layers of the Highline, meaning the Highline is a hybrid space. You know, it's not really a park. We have plans, but we also have a path, and we have 8 million people coming. So and we are like there were trains there. So it's just it's this weird organism. And I think to me the most successful works on the Highland have been those that they can really establish a dialogue with these elements. Maybe not all of them, but they don't feel like a plop sculpture that just landed on the park. Maybe it's gorgeous, but it doesn't belong there. And I think what I like to see is like sitting on a bench and looking at how visitors experience the artist. There is always this kind of moment of surprise because it's almost like an encounter that they don't expect. Because frankly, I don't think people come to the Highland to see the art, maybe some, but most of the people that come, they come for the experience. And I think the moment in which they encounter a sculpture or like a billboard, it's because they're not expecting it, that's the sparkle that makes the program so interesting for me, because it's less of a transactional moment. You know, when you go to MoMA, you kind of know after you pay $25, you know that you're gonna see the best art in the world. And I think your approach is a bit more passive because, you know, you look at a painting and okay, on the Highland you don't go to see art. And I think the relationship between art and the other aspects of the park and the vegetation is what makes art very unique, and also what brings back visitors that are from New York. And they don't just come once a year, but they come and see how each sculpture is different every 3 or 4 weeks, because they really do change every 3 or 4 weeks because the vegetation changes, and now they're covered with snow, and tomorrow, you know, it's gonna be the first blooms in the park. So again, it's about being flexible enough to wanting to establish a dialogue with these other aspects. Hi.
So you said you change the art every 2 to 3 weeks?
No, we change it once a year.
Once a year.
But what I'm saying is that because the way the planting on the Highland has been designed and conceived is very much a 365 days park. So even when you go like in January, you can still see colors, and you know the way it's been conceived is really like a park that is great also in the winter. But the colors and the shape of the garden changes dramatically every 3 or 4 weeks, because there are new blooms and the vegetation grows a lot. And so very often the sculptures are installed within the vegetation, and so sometimes, you know, they're hidden. You don't see them anymore. Sometimes they're like completely under the snow. And so I think there is something quite nice about following the life of an artwork on the Highland.
I have, sorry, another question.
No, it's
Do you
okay.
like working with local artists, new artists, international?
We do both. We do, you know, I would say 50-50. It's we work with New York artists, with American artists, and with international artists. We try to keep a good balance. We don't have a rule. Of course, we count. We make sure that we don't have only international artists or only local artists. But you know, the Highland is an international destination, and the fact that you may come from Korea and you see a Korean artist on the Highland, I think it's fantastic. Or like as Italian, you know, I try to bring some Italian artists. I think it's something great. So
I don't think the Highline didn't have art when it first opened, right?
the Highland had the first couple, so the Highland opened in 2009, and
So
for the
next year will be 10 years.
yes, and
We will have a celebration.
yeah, we're gonna have a great year-long celebration. It's 10 years of the opening of the park and 20 years of Friends of the Highland, which is the non-profit organization. So when the Highland opened in 2009, there was art indeed, but it was commissioned by Creative Time, which is this other great public art organization, and they commission a couple of one major piece per year. And then in 2011, I got hired, and we kind of built our own program. But in the beginning, it was more like a consultancy. But there was always art on the Highland.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question. Is the Highland part of the New York City Parks Department? Or is it kept like the Conservancy?
So the Highline is a public park. It's owned by the City of New York, but is managed and operated by Friends of the Highland, which is a non-profit organization for which I work. And it's a very traditional collaboration, private-public, which it's actually the same way the Central Park works. People don't know that there is Central Park Conservancy that raises 85% of the budget. We raise 100% of the budget. So we raise everything that you see in terms of cleaning and maintenance and planting and art, everything.
Over there.
As an international woman in an American art world, what were some professional key challenges that you faced and how did you overcome them?
That's a tough question. It's I feel I've been very lucky. I always worked either as an independent curator. The Highland, for instance, is a very progressive organization. Like, we truly believe in creating an equitable workspace and an equitable park, and that's something that is hard to achieve, but it's very much in everyone's heart. And I think maybe we're a bit luckier than other organizations because we're a young organization. Not only like people that work there are slightly younger than maybe a MoMA, but also it's just 20 years, so we are still able to flex the muscle and change our culture. So I feel I've been really lucky, but I recognize that I also come from a place of privilege, and so I think New York City is a great city for that, and I think I see a lot of changes happening, both culturally and institutionally. So I just hope that, again, when we meet again in a year, we'll all be happier.
Out of curiosity, because you said that most of the works are commissioned, what happens after that, especially to the big, large-scale ones?
They go back to the artists. So, and then the artists can do whatever they want with it. Usually, like an average sculpture that we make is something that can have an afterlife. Of course, like the mural doesn't go anywhere. We just paint over. But we have a contract with the artist that says, that's why I was saying, we are very proud of commissioning works because lots of museums don't. And of course, if you show a MoMA, it's amazing because everyone is going to see your work. But I think we want to function. Our niche is very much that of commissioning and producing, which means especially artists working in public art, it's not easy to find the money to do that because public art is expensive because you have to deal with all these things that I was describing before. So we really want to focus on working with artists that haven't done public art before and take them by hands and help them achieving that. And then the work goes back to the artists, and hopefully they'll do other art, like public art projects, or maybe they won't because the experience was so awful. But we want to be a trampoline for artists, also to experiment with something new.
Have you ever repeated an artist, like call them back? And do they do their own maintenance of the piece?
No, we do maintenance, repeating. There might have been a couple of overlapping in terms of maybe we show someone's work on our video program and then we invited them to do something. Usually, no, I would say no. We like to give chances to many different artists. Great.
Besides the three Statue of Liberty, what can we expect this year? I've heard that there will be an Italian artist also.
Yeah, so we have, every year we do a group exhibition, which means it's an exhibition that has several artists. Unlike a museum, you don't really see the artworks together, so it's more like curating the experience of walking the Highland, and sort of when you know the theme, then you can create, links and connections. So I can't really tell you the title because it hasn't been announced yet, but it's a show that looks at the power of art for creating the public space. So there is a lot of political works, and I can say that there is a great Italian artist, her name is Marinella Senatore, who will bring a light installation to the Highland, actually under the Highland. When you enter, it's on the south end of the Highland, near the Whitney, we can use the bottom of the Highland. And so we'll do a beautiful light installation there that sort of is reminiscent of these quite incredible light installations that are very common in South Italy, like in Puglia, for instance. And they're like basically light architectures that are created for religious ceremonies or rituals in general. And so she's bringing that tradition to the Highland. And so we hope to create this sort of public space under the Highland that people can use.
Fantastic. Now that you mentioned the Whitney Museum, that is at the beginning of the Highline, do you have any collaboration with them?
We have a great relationship with them. We are in constant contact. We haven't done a major artwork, like a project together, also because I feel like they need, they're kind of new to the neighborhood. They need to kind of understand also how to use their space and the museum and the outdoor spaces. But we have a great relationship. And for us, we were kind of arrogant in the beginning and thinking like, oh, they're not going to change. Like, we have 8 million people, nothing is going to change, nothing is going to affect us. Actually, when the Whitney opened, it did affect our visitation, which grew, and actually grew probably in my advantage, meaning that more art lovers came then to the Highline. But so I think now it's also, it was the first year that they opened, so they had, 1 million visitors, which is incredible for them. But now it's very interesting because, the Highland is about 1.5 miles long. At the south end, you have the Whitney Museum. At the northern end, at 30th Street and 10th Avenue, just in a year or so, there is this new cultural institution that is opening that is called The Shed. And The Shed is a multidisciplinary performance and theater space, which has this amazing architecture. I'm sure you've seen renderings in the papers it's a shed that moves in and out, and it creates a space that at times is open, like a plaza, at times it's enclosed, like a theater. And so it's kind of interesting for us to think of the Highland as a space that physically connects these two entities, but also that on its own generates a lot of cultural experiences. So it's you question what you do quite often there because the landscape and the cityscape is changing so dramatically. If in this case, it's great to add 2 new cultural institutions downtown. So, but it does affect what you do because you have to tweak your program a little bit, considering that other people might do what you do better and they might not do what you do better. So it's a conversation.
Yeah, and in the north side there will be this vessel, this huge system of
it's a stair.
yeah. Stairs. That was built in Italy, I learned.
Yeah. So it's this. It's an architectural feature by this British architect designer called Thomas Heatherwick, and it's basically like a beehive that it's like 15. Like, imagine a building that is 15-story high. So it's giant, and it's basically a staircase that you can climb all the way up to the last floor. And it was built in Italy because I don't know why, but I remember that
Monfalcone. There are important factories.
Yeah, but it's been coming in pieces, and they were parked just next to the Highland, an empty lot. So we witnessed the construction of this thing for the last 12 months, and it's been kind of amazing. You'll hear a lot about it in the next few months.
It will be very exciting. I mean, walking along the High Line and then climbing the stairs, it will be art and exercise.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like somebody made the joke that maybe the stair is the same length of the Highland, just wrapped on its own. So I don't know if that's, that was the architect's intent, but it's gonna be a lot of stairs.
Yeah.
So
It will be a lot of fun. Any other question?
When is the new exhibition starting?
April 19. And so on Saturday, the 21st, we have the opening of the season, which is called Culture Shock. So you should all come to the Highland. We do lots of events. It's the opening of the art season and the opening of all the other programming that we do for families and adults. It's going to be great. Lots of performers and artists.
When again?
The 21st, which I believe it's a Saturday.
April?
Yes, it's called
Okay.
Culture Shock. Check out the website highline.org and come, bring your kids, and it's going to be fun. Hopefully the weather will hold up.
Hopefully. Thank you so much, Cecilia.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.